Hi, I'm Professor Green, and today we'll be doing Chapter 4, Part 2. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Right. So, talking further about identity and social bias, these are the learning objectives for this section. First, we're going to recognize self-identity and its relation to social bias. And so, talking about what self-identity is, because everybody has lots of different ways that they identify themselves. So we're going to recognize it in its various forms and explain how identities are developed and maintained and how important they are. Describe the impact of self-identity on attitudes and behaviors, and list the most common types of social bias. So what is identity? Identity represents the ways in which individuals describe themselves or the ways in which people are characterized by society. Every person has several identities, such as age, race, gender, socioeconomic status, religion, etc. Obviously, we're very familiar with, religion, nationality, etc. The gender one is one that's, come up differently in the past couple of years. And I was watching a show recently, just like that. And Che Rivera, she's a major character, and she kept saying, like, I keep having to explain myself to people, right? Because she, identifies as a different type of gender, and that is something new, and to society. And so, especially to older generations, they're not so familiar with this. So some identities are surface level and easy to observe. Such are not, such as personality, religion, values, or political affiliation. And so, just looking at my notes, want to make sure I included everything there. Yes, I think so. What are some common types of self-identities? So, right, in terms of social categories or groups that they belong to, a fraternity, roles they occupy, if you're a student or a teacher, the individual characteristics, are they analytical or honest? So we tend to define ourselves in three essential ways in terms of affiliations with groups, in terms of roles, like I'm a mother, I'm a wife, or in terms of individual unique traits. And so hopefully I am a compassionate professor, I am friendly, etc. So social and group identities, this section I feel like is kind of somewhat common sense, but let's go through it anyway. So just so you're familiar with the terms, how it's common to characterize ourselves and others based on our memberships and affiliations, is part of our social identity, and that's okay. To say that we're part of a group. Through a process of self-categorization, to perceive, categorize, or classify the self in relation to a group or affiliation. I remember when I was growing up here in the US, and I went to Switzerland for the first time, I really felt it really self-validated who I thought I was, because I grew up with a Swiss grandmother, even though I was born in the US, and we had a lot of traditions and different things. And so ever since then, I've often said that I'm Swiss. I don't say I'm American. I'll often say I'm Swiss American, because it's a category that I feel really represents who it is that I am. And so then we have also role identities, occupation. As I said, I'm a teacher, I'm a spouse, a mother, etc. And so where self-definitions and self-worth are realized through fulfillment of the expectations of our relationship partners. And it's true, I do get a lot of self-satisfaction from knowing that that I'm a mother, for me personally, that I'm a professor, and that I'm a daughter too. I really enjoy being a daughter. But there's also role conflict, right? Conformity and strain. So as you can see, right, especially when we talked about genders, right? With this new thing, that it's not always the way people don't interpret these things the same way. So conflicts when we observe people behaving in ways that are inconsistent with the norms for a function, role, or relationship. our own idea of what a role entails, right? So it's only our own idea. We're likely to feel a sense of comfort when we enact behaviors that match the norms of a particular situation. This is known as role conformity. And so when I see students who are studying and attending class, it gives me comfort to know that they are following the rules of being a student. But when we're forced to act in ways that conflict with our own internalized meanings, we like to experience role conflict. And so, and role strain is the stress that people experience when they are unable to meet the demands of multiple, often conflicting or incompatible social role. And we talk a lot about role strain, working mothers, right? So sometimes we're working professionals and sometimes we're mothers, and we're kind of pulled in lots of different directions. I can definitely relate to that because I think society is still kind of figuring out what to do with working mothers. I think Scandinavia and different places, they've kind of worked that out over the last couple of decades, that they gave a lot of mothers a lot of time off. And then when they go back to the workplace, they're very understanding of that. And so that's why a lot of women do go back. But here in the US, it's not that way. And so I feel that there is a lot of strain as we figure this out. And so personal identity, this is, the set of traits and individual differences that set people apart from one another. Include characteristics that are held core to an individual. So people really take this very seriously. And so whereas role identities are context dependent, such as one's role changes given the circumstance. When I'm at LMU, I'm a professor. When I'm at home, I'm a mother. Personal identities are more persistent and tend to guide behavior across situations. So I'm definitely very Swiss as a mother and as a professor. And I'm also a Catholic, right? When I'm a mother and when I'm a professor. So how does identity affect behavior? So how does this affect your own behavior, and how does this affect others within your working context? How it explains how individuals create and define their place at work and in society at large, right? And so people, if they know that I'm a working mother, you'll know that usually I, shut my phone off at 9 p.m., things like this. Identities also help explain why people behave as they do. As we regularly seek to act in ways that are consistent with our social, cognitive, and emotional identities. Self-identities indicate what is important to us and activate personal values. And so again, that is my value, to become a mother and to work at the same time. But some people have other values. Maybe some people think that mothers should not be working. So there's a link between identity activation, authenticity, and self-esteem. So let's hop into the next one. So if there's an identity threat, right, this is when people feel shame or guilt for actions by its group or its members. So if people think that Catholics, sometimes we are said that we have this amazing guilt, and people think that guilt is not valued, then Catholics can feel a little bit shameful, that they're feeling so guilty for different things. Can also occur when members think that their group is no longer efficiently distinct from other groups. So this is kind of a cool topic, I think. If a group doesn't feel unique anymore, and then they feel kind of like that they're not special anymore. So I kind of feel like if people put me as a Catholic into a group of like Protestants, or they say like, oh yeah, at Pepperdine too, they're very religious. Well, I'm actually not Protestant, so there are characteristics that identify Catholics versus the Protestants. And personal and role identities are threatened, but when an individual prefers the recognition of one identity, but instead is addressed by another. So an example here is, I'm a clinical professor, and so people should call me Professor Green, but the PhDs, they're called doctor. And so sometimes the PhDs get upset when they're called professor, like Professor Dong, he's not Professor Dong, he's Dr. Dong. Or when people call me Dr. Green, sometimes the PhDs will get upset because I don't have the PhD, so I should really only be called Professor Green. And so what is social bias? And this, shows up in the news in the headlines again and again, is a flawed judgment, right? That affects how people perceive themselves as others, as well as the ways groups behave, act, and reach decisions. And I remember once a colleague of mine met my mom for the first time, and she's in her 70s, and sometimes she can get a little judgmental. She'll tell you that herself. And my friend was like, oh my gosh, she just had, 10 social biases within like 10 minutes. And I was kind of embarrassed for her because, when we are self-aware, we try not do these types of things. I think she didn't realize it. It's kind of the way she grew up under the communists at times. And she's definitely, I try and correct her. And so she's trying to make that shift. But biases, as I said, like are learned and reflect variables like race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, educational status, etc. They come from stereotypes. And so she was kind of using it to classify people, which the brain needs, as we said in the last section. But right, when we start to make too many assumptions is when we get into trouble. And the common types of biases, right, are stereotypes, group attribution bias, prejudice, discrimination, etc. So you're all very familiar with these types of things. And so that ends the second part of chapter 4. As I said, for much of this is probably a review for you, but good to kind of just talk about it so that all are aware of all of these things. I will see you for section 3 of chapter 4.